Today's Necron tips, green rods. Love them or hate them. I'm going to give you the ins and outs and the tips and tricks that I've learnt over the years, and also show you how to make green Necron crystals.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, today I want to talk about Necron Green rods. I know a lot of people don't like them. Indeed, even GW are starting to change the kits from green rods to just plastic models. However, green rods are still available in some kits, and in today's video I'm going to share my experience, my tips and tricks on using the green rods. I'm also going to show you how to make cool Necron crystals from the green rods and sprue. So without further ado, let's go table down and have a look. Okay, so Necron Green rods. Now I can understand why some people don't like them, especially if you're a painter. Possibly they look a little bit odd if you're trying to paint your miniatures. However, personally, I really like them. I think they look super cool. They're what drew me to the Necron army, and I think they make the Necron army look very unique. To the actual point that I try to put green rods on the models that don't even have them. So the three models there on the right hand side, the Death Marks, Imitate the Stormlord and the Overlord, do not come as standard with green rods. I've actually converted the models to get them on there, and I think it really adds some depth to the models. And over the years I've built up a certain way to get these green rods look as good as I can, and that's what I want to talk about next. Before that though, if you would like to keep up to date with the wonders of Warhammer 40k, not miss a Necron upload, then please give me a sub and hit the bell button so you don't miss a video. Okay, so here are the green rods. Now it's fair to say if you just clip these off of this sprue, pop them on the gun, the chances are they are literally just going to look like little pieces of plastic stuck onto the model. Maybe that's where people don't like them or don't like the look of them. Now, with a few tips and tricks I'm going to show you now, you can change them from looking like little bits of plastic to actually looking like Necron weapons. So, what are the tips? Well, the first one is to try and get your rods to have no air bubbles in the actual rod. If you can see an air bubble in there, the chances are it's going to look like an air bubble on the model. Now obviously you can't necessarily pick and choose, you get what you get in the box, but in my experience not all of the rods have air bubbles. Some will, some won't, so try to pick the ones without air bubbles. That is a good start. Right, next is you're going to take one of these green rods off of the sprue, and what tends to happen is you end up with this little bit of flash just on the side of the sprue. Not a problem, we can easily take that off just with our knife, so we can just take that off. Now I've seen some people, they don't even do this, they just stick them straight onto the model, and to be fair that looks awful. Now what happens is when you take that little section off, you end up with a little dot. You think, okay, that's not a problem, I can hide that by putting that at the bottom of the gun. The trouble is when you do that, you end up with a little line just where that little spot is. So that just doesn't look very good, especially when you're looking down on top of the model. So what I've done is I've devised a little way to reduce that little spot down. So what you do, you have to be a bit careful and you don't want to go too harsh, but if you take your knife and you find where that little dot is, and you basically scrape your knife along that edge where the dot is, literally straight over it. So let's just do that just to show you. So I'm not going to go too hard. I want to add a line to the bottom to basically add a defect to it. And the idea is that when we turn that over now, that little spot is pretty much hidden. So when it's on one of our models, here's my warrior, I've glued this in so that the spot is at the bottom and that line. And now when you look down, it's very difficult to actually see that spot. It looks like it's part of the weapon. And I think just doing that and making sure you don't have one with an air bubble in really helps enhance the look of the green rods. Now when it comes to gluing the rods onto the models, as I said, you need to make sure that little section that we've scraped away is at the bottom of the model. Now the glue that you need to use to glue them in is PVA glue or white glue. And the reason for that is if you use super glue, the super glue will burn the rod. Now I know some people say, oh, you can just push it into place, and you can actually. If you look at a rod, it's got two little dimples poking out on either side. However, I find that they don't necessarily fit in that well. In actual fact, what I do is I cut that little dimple off. So I just get my knife and just cut that off like so on both sides, and then use PVA glue to glue them in. And I've never had a green rod come out of a model using PVA glue. Now some rods you will have to cut down to size, like on the Heavy Destroyer, or indeed on my conversion of the Death Marks. That's a lot smaller than this Warrior one, and I just cut that using a pair of clippers. And I think these green rods really enhance the models. I think they look awesome, and indeed the green rods can be very useful for other things as well, which I'm going to talk about next. So let's make some green rod crystals. Okay, so we've got our green rods. Sometimes you'll have a few green rods left over, and if you don't, you can always use the actual sprue itself to try and make some crystals. Now we've got several types of crystals that we can make. The first one is crystal shards. That's something like these here. I've got just a couple, and if you have them sticking out of the ground, they can look really cool. They are quite small. So I'll show you how to make these ones. So all you do is take one of the rods and your clippers, and I'm going to be looking to clip these down. Now the end of the clipper will have to be angled. What you're going to be doing is looking for a flat section on one side, preferably angled, so when it's on the ground it's not sort of sticking straight up, it's coming out at an angle, because it just looks a lot better. And then just get your clippers and literally clip down some of this little rod, and then you can put those on your bases. Then they look really cool, just like little Necron crystals or shards of crystals. Now if you want to take that one step further, you can make a nice long crystal coming out of the ground. Now again, you have to cut it off so that this bottom section is at an angle, so when it's sticking out the ground it just looks a little bit more realistic if it's angled. And then get a knife, and you're looking to put this into a point on the end here. So all you have to do is just gently cut towards the outside down into the middle area, then just rotate the rod and do that, going around the rod until you end up with a sort of pattern going up into a point. So one more should do it. There we go, that looks really cool. And then you would just glue that onto your base, and it looks really, really cool. So that is one option. Now as I said, you may not necessarily have some of those rods left, and if you don't, the next alternative is to use the actual sprue itself. So once again, just cut out a section of this sprue, like so. You're looking for one flat area, which as I've cut it out already, I've got a flat area and it is slightly angled, which is ideal. So once again, all you have to do is get your knife and just cut it downwards at an angle. Make sure you don't cut it towards any fingers, and ideally have a cutting mat underneath, so you don't want to go into a table, for example, and get into trouble with your mum or the wife. Like so. There we go. So we've got a nice little point on there, and that is going to look really cool as a Necron crystal. And of course you could combine these bigger crystals with the smaller ones as well, and just have them in something like this. It'll look really cool on the bases. So that's something that you can do with either the leftovers or the actual green rods themselves. Now maybe you don't like those type of crystals, maybe you're just not a fan of those green crystals, but you do want crystals. Well, I've got a different type of crystal on my base. I don't actually use those green rods. I've got this one here. Now this is made of just a normal plastic sprue, and then I've got this design here. Now this is made from green stuff. Now I do have a full tutorial on me making those crystals, so what I'll do is I'll link you up to that video in the top right hand corner. Go and check it out to find out more. Now if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, hit my icon at the end of the video so you can keep up to date with the wonders of Warhammer 40k. Beam me up!